Well, good morning, everyone. Church is still full. I haven't offended you yet. I'll keep trying. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving. Oh, Steve's back. You and me got to talk. We got an issue going on here. I was coming out to your house to go shooting, and you disappeared. Oh, man. I'm offended now. I'm offended. So right after church, you and I got to have a little get together. Good to see you back, Steve. I was told this morning that some of the young people don't listen to my sermons because I'm not funny enough. So I'm going to try a joke. And I'm not really good with jokes. So there was this little boy who was sent to church by his dad. His dad, when I was a kid, that happened. I don't know how many times my parents sent me to church. They didn't go. But they told me I had to go to Sunday school and I had to go to church. So the little boy was a little mischief, and I know about that. This mischievous little boy who doesn't listen and doesn't pay attention and is very distracting in church. And so the little boy goes, and he doesn't hear a single thing that's going on. But when he gets home, his dad questions him and says, "What did this pastor preach about this morning?" And he said, "Sin." His dad said, "Well, what did he have to say about it?" The little boy said, "I'm pretty sure he was against it." So for those young people who don't listen to my sermons, if you can take that home today and remember the pastor's against sin, you're good. You can check out and go back to your phones right now. I had a whole different sermon planned until I met with some people earlier this week, and I had a couple of times where I thought, I got to do this, I got to change it. And so I'm in the middle of the week, I wrote a new sermon than I originally planned to do. And I want to tell you in advance that this is one of those sermons that I'm speaking to myself first and foremost. For those of you who have met me and known me and have spent time with me, you know I'm a type A personality. I'm kind of driven, and I drive myself hard, and I expect a lot of other people, and I do drive people a little bit. I'm aware of that. That doesn't mean I'm in control of it or I have overcome it. So as you listen to this sermon, I'm talking to myself. Okay? For those of you who were alive when Teddy Roosevelt was president back in 1903, and there must be a few of you at least that remember Teddy, you remember, some of you had it in class in school where Teddy said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." Now, a lot of people think it was "walk softly," but that's a misquote. He actually said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." And this was in relationship to his diplomacy in the Caribbean, in which he was exerting a lot of power at the time. Wasn't saying a lot, but he was going down there with a force of military in the Caribbean. So most of us, at least my age, remember the statement, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." And I think at times I do that. I try to speak softly, but I make sure I carry a lot of authority behind what I do. I guess it's part of the job. People expect a pastor to be a little of authoritarian, and God has given me a personality that is quite authoritarian. So me and Teddy would have gotten along real well. But when you come to Scripture, you see a little different picture. And I want to share this with you. You can look it up. I'll put it on the screen if you don't have time, or you can look it up in your iPads or iPhones, or you could actually get out a good old-fashioned book and open it up. In 1 Thessalonians 2, verses 4 to 8. Paul says, "Just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak not as pleasing men, but God who examines our hearts. For we never came with flattering speech, as you know, nor with a pretext for greed. God is witness. Nor do we seek glory from men, either from you or from others, even though as apostles of Christ we may have asserted our authority. But we prove to be gentle among you, as a nursing mother tenderly cares for her own children. Having so fond an affection for you, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you had become very dear to us." Now, when I read Paul, I see a type A personality. I think you had to be Paul to be a church planter in the first century, starting up new churches with the opposition of the Jews, and you also had the Roman opposition. And Paul was a very assertive person. But here he says to the Thessalonians that we treated you gently, as a nursing mother treats her children. Now I know that all nursing mothers don't love and treat their children with compassion and grace. Unfortunately, we live in a world of sin, and there are mothers who actually mistreat their children and abuse their children and withhold tender and mercy to their children. But Paul says, as a healthy mother shows tenderness and mercy to her children, we showed that to you. I want to go on and read a statement by Ellen White where she talks about how Jesus dealt with Judas. She says, God takes men as they are, with the human elements in their character, and trains them for his service. If they will be disciplined and learned of him, they are not chosen because they are perfect, but notwithstanding their imperfections, that through the knowledge and practice of the truth, through the grace of Christ, they may become transformed into his image. Judas had the same opportunities as the other disciples. He listened to the same precious lessons, but the practice of truth which Christ required was at variance with the desires and purposes of Judas. He would not yield his ideas in the order to receive wisdom from heaven. How tenderly the Savior dealt with him who was to be his betrayer. Jesus knew the character of Judas, but up until the end, and if you remember in John 13 at the foot washing communion, Jesus, knowing that Satan had entered into Judas, knowing that he was going to betray him, how did Jesus treat Judas? With a great amount of tenderness, didn't he? There was no harsh talking. There was no abruptness. Jesus still was working with Judas to convert him up until the very moment in which he walked out of that upper room and he went out and betrayed Jesus. So I became intrigued by this concept of tenderness, because that's not natural to my personality. Isaiah 42, verses 1 to 3, speaking of Jesus in prophetic language, said, Behold my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. He will not cry out nor raise his voice, nor make his voice heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, and a dimly burning wick he will not extinguish. He will faithfully bring forth justice. This is talking about Jesus and his ministry. And if we think about how Jesus functioned with people, how did Jesus deal with sinners? The one I like to think about is the woman caught in adultery in John chapter 8. Remember how the Pharisees brought her to Jesus, threw her down and condemned her and criticized her. How did Jesus deal with her? Gently and tenderly. Was she in the wrong? Yes, she was. So were the Pharisees. They were equally as wrong as she was. But he didn't condemn her. He didn't hold her sin up in her face. He didn't justify her sin, because he said, I don't condemn you, woman, but go and sin no more. So he did not say that sin was okay, but he treated her with such a gentleness, such a tender way. I wish I could do that all the time. I wish I had that tenderness of Christ. I know I need it. And I know sometimes in churches we're not as gentle and tender to the broken and the bruised and the battered as we should be. And there are times that because of the way the church functions and operates, we expect an awful lot of people. And my experience in Adventism is we have a pretty high expectation of people and their behaviors. And we criticize and condemn. But these are broken people. These are people who are hurting. These are people who need tenderness and gentleness. In Matthew 11, verse 28, Jesus himself says, Come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest from your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. How do we, as Christians, treat the broken, the sinners, with tenderness and gentleness so that we are representing Jesus Christ. How do we do that? Because, we're broken people too. I want to start a new group. You all know about AA and how you stand up in front of the group and you say, my name is Kevin Keymichael and I'm an addict. I'm a recovering addict. We should start a sinners group and stand up and say, I'm a recovering sinner. And I will forever be a recovering sinner. And I need to remember that to be humble. That I, as a sinner, cannot condemn another person. That I cannot use force or coercion or guilt or manipulation. That I need to remember that I come to the foot of the cross humbly. And so do the brokenhearted and the weak behind us. I'm preaching to myself, friends, because I struggle with this. Because sometimes I expect a lot of people. And now I want to tell you a story. All right, put your phones down. You can listen to this. I'm not preaching. I'm telling a story. A young black man, came to me one day. I don't know how he found me, and he wanted to study the Bible with me. He actually was a graduate of the city mission in Cleveland. He had been on the streets. He was a drug user. He had gone through the rehab program at the city mission in Cleveland, which is very comparable to the mission that we heard about this morning. He was an ex-football player. He's a big guy. He had muscles. He scared me sometimes. Seriously, he was 240, 250, and he was at least 6'4". But he had gone through the program at the city mission, and he had found Christ. He had overcome his addictions. He was no longer taking drugs. They had gone through the program. They had helped him get established. He had now had a wife. And he was serious about Bible study. And anytime somebody comes to me and wants to study the Bible, I'm more than willing to sit down. And so he's asking questions, and he wants to go deeper. And you could see that there was an intensity in this young man. And I was really pleased that he had chosen me through whatever means. I don't know how he found me. He was not a Seventh-day Adventist. He just wanted to learn the Bible more and more. So I would go over to his apartment, and he was living in the projects, and that was scary for me. I would go over to his apartment and study the Bible with him and his wife at least once a week. He had some damage from both concussions and from his drug use. So he had some learning disabilities, and sometimes he would struggle with certain concepts. And so I was constantly trying to help him see the grace and mercy of God and trying to help him with some of these Bible study concepts. But I noticed in the progression of the Bible studies that this young man became more and more intense. An intensity that was starting to scare me. He was coming to church on a regular basis. He was worshiping. And I noticed in worship that he was quite loud. Very almost scary in when he would sing or he would be praising the Lord, that he would almost scare you. Not only was he big, but he had a very booming voice. I never said anything to him because he was in the development stages and I didn't want to discourage him. But there were times that I wanted to take him aside and say, you need to tone it down a little bit. But I didn't. Maybe I should have. A few months after he had been coming to church regularly and studying, he came in with it. He asked if he could speak to me and the elders. And he came in with his wife. And he had a list of all the things that were wrong with the church and the leadership that we needed to fix. And I said, well, let's read through these. And he was extremely critical, very judgmental. And I noticed in his relationship with his wife that he was becoming extremely legalistic, even in the sense of an Adventist legalism. He was outdoing Adventists in his legalism. And it was very scary. So I tried to talk with him, and I know that he offended a number of the leadership because of his aggressive, you got to change this. There's a strong works orientation. Well, this continued, and he started to take people aside in the church and started to dress them down. And I would talk to him, and I'd say, let's talk about this a little bit. Well, one day after several incidents where he was becoming extremely aggressive with people, and telling them about their behaviors, their dress, what they're eating, how they're worshiping. And he had this whole long list that he was going through. I took him aside and I tried to ask him if he understood grace as unmerited favor, that God gives this to you. You could see in the look of his eyes and the way that he responded to me that this concept of grace was foreign, and he wanted to argue with me that that's not how it works. That's not how God is. I talked to him about, I'm going to share a Bible story that I shared with him in just a second when I finish my story. He flamed out finally at a Christmas service 2 years ago. You see, he had a problem with pagan images in the church. He had a big problem with that. Well, we always put up a tree. We didn't have a lot of decorations, but we always put up a tree, and we put up some decorations. And what we would do is similar to what Tom's doing, is we would ask people to bring in socks and mittens and hats and underwear, all brand new, and hang it on the tree. And we were going to donate all of this stuff to the community. So the tree was a giving tree that we asked people during the Christmas season that we weren't going to hang ornaments on the tree. We were going to hang these gifts and bring them. And if people wanted to donate money for community services or to purchase food for the community, they could bring all of those up as an offering and hang it on the tree. And he had a serious problem with this. I must have had 10 or 12 conversations with this young man, asking him to slow down, to back down, to reevaluate his theology. I woke up on Sabbath morning ready to go to church. I was preaching that day, and I had the flu, and I was vomiting. And I was still going to go to church, and my wife, that's why God gives us wives, because they have better sense than us guys. Because I was going to go, and she said, "You are not going to church." And so I went back to bed. I probably slept most of the day after that. But what happened, and I was not there, my wife was there, this young man walked into the back of the church during service and started shouting at the top of his lungs that we were pagans worshiping the Christmas tree. The children were crying because they were so afraid of him. Literally, the children started to cry. We had little ones, 4, 5, 6-year-olds. And the kids were afraid. And he had taken it upon himself to be a champion for truth. And he was going to make sure that he was going to clean up the church. Well, 2 or 3 of the largest men in the church went and asked him to leave quietly, and he wouldn't leave. They escorted him out the back door, the door, and he came back in another door. And this is where you don't ever want to get on the bad side of my wife, because she came after him then, and she got her finger up there, and she said, "Don't you ever come back in this church again, or I will have the police in here." And I've seen my wife mad a few times at me, but she got really upset. And I'm gonna tell you a secret, that when my wife is upset with you, she breaks out in hives and gets blotchy. So if you see that coming, you turn around and run, okay? If you see her getting a little blotchy, you better back down, and whatever she says, you better do it, because I'm probably making her blotchy right now. In one of the conversations I had with this young man, I shared this biblical story. And if you'd like to read it, it's found in Genesis. Actually, the story of Jacob meeting his brother Esau, we hardly ever focus on what happens after Jacob wrestles with the angel. And we talk a little bit about their meeting, but this text takes place after the meeting of Jacob and Esau, after the wrestling of the angel with Jacob. And for many of you, you might not even be aware of this. It's something we just kind of race over. And I want to share it with you this morning, because I sat down with him and I shared this text with him, because he kept telling me I was a bad leader because I wasn't pushing the church. I wasn't arguing. I wasn't making this church perfect. And therefore, I was not qualified to be the leader or even a pastor. And he said that to me on a number of occasions. So the story ends up like this. Then Esau said, now remember the story? Esau is coming to meet his brother, and he has 400 fighting men with him. Originally, Esau was coming to do battle with his brother, but because of the angel meeting Jacob, and something happened with Esau, when they came together, there was reconciliation. Okay, there was two brothers who, at least Esau wanted to kill his brother. God caused a change there. So Esau said to his brother, "Let us take our journey and go, and I will go before you." But Jacob said to him, My Lord knows that the children are frail, and the flocks and the herds which are nursing are a care to me. And if they are driven hard one day, all the flocks will die. Please let my Lord pass on before his servants, and I will proceed at my leisure, according to the pace of the cattle that are before me, and according to the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord at Seir. Esau was a fighting man who brought fighting men to fight with his brother. But when the reconciliation took place, he said to his brother, "Come on, I will take you home, and we'll go with an entourage. And we'll head home and with all of my mighty men." And Jacob said, "Look at my company here. I have children. I have small animals. And I cannot travel any faster than the weakest in my party." Isn't that amazing what Jacob said to his brother? Can we learn something about church by listening to Jacob's counsel? Jacob recognized the weak in his party. Do you think that there are weak in our church that we need to take it a little easy on them? Do you think that there are some that are pretty beaten and battered and broken and that we can't push? No matter how fast or how far you want them to go, they need gentleness. They need tenderness. Jacob refused to go any faster than the weakest in his party. There are times that I see churches pushing people to go faster and harder. And it's not always with theology. I don't want you to understand this necessarily in theological constructs. There are other ways that we push in the church too that have nothing to do with biblical theology, but has to do with methodologies. So don't get hung up on theological discussions now, because it's bigger than that. Jacob did not allow the peer pressure of his brother to force him to do something he knew that he should not do. His brother would have loved to have run with the horses and the mighty men of his army, the 400. Jacob said, "No, I know we just kind of reconciled, and I know, but I have to be concerned about the party that I have, and I cannot go any faster." But you also notice that he did keep moving forward. The weak did not stop the movement. It just affected the speed and the way in which the movement took place. So yes, as churches, as believers in Christ, I think we need to have forward movement. I think we need to encourage. We encourage our kids to grow up, don't we? How many of you still have 18 or 19-year-olds in diapers? That's a terrible thought, isn't it? But we move them along as they're capable, as they're able. We encourage, we train. We don't push and coerce, although I know a few moms who would love to push their kids into potty training a little bit faster, especially those boys. You know, those boys are hard to potty train. Man, they just refuse to get... They are, aren't they? My daughter could not wait. She potty trained. My son will be here in 2 weeks. Don't tell him I said this. We couldn't get him out of his diapers. He was perfectly okay with the mess. He was like, "Oh, that's all right." Guys are that way. They just, little boys, they're fine in those messy diapers. So there are times that we encourage and we try to train, but we have to be careful with the weakest and the gentlest. We have to work with them where they are. Because not everybody's getting it like I get it or like you get it. But he did keep moving forward. He just did so at a different pace. So what can we, as a family of God, as a congregation, what can we learn from Jacob's story? Let's take a look. Jacob let's see. What do we need to do better or differently to follow Jacob's counsel? I find sometimes that we set the bar too high for people. Now, if you think of a high jumper, does a high jumper set the bar at the highest possible limit that he can go? Or where do they start? They start at something manageable, right? A high jumper works up, but he never starts out at the top. In any competition, they will ask the high jumper, what are you comfortable? What do we want to set the bar with? And he'll say, and it'll be a comfortable level, one that he knows that he can achieve. And only after he is comfortable with that level will they move the bar up a little bit. And sometimes we forget that as a church body, some of you can do a whole lot higher leaping than others. And do you know what happens to the weaker in the group when you're jumping the bar at a real high level? What's the first response that people have when the bar is set too high? They quit, don't they? They quit. Is that possible that there are some people who are not coming to this church anymore because the bar has been too high? And that they feel that they will never ever be able to live up to the expectations that we have set. And I'm not saying we've necessarily set those because we're being mean or because we're trying to hurt people, but we've forgotten the weak in our party. The slower, the weaker, the younger. And that's the question we have to ask ourselves. I don't know the answers to these questions. It's not my job to answer them. It's only my job to question them. To get you to think. Because that's part of my job, is to get you to think. If I'm always giving you the answer, then you're not thinking. What have we stopped doing what have we stopped doing that benefits the body of Christ because we've made it so complicated? This is a question that you're going to have to answer, because I don't know what you used to do. I haven't been here long enough to know the full history and everything that happens. But if you think back to some of the good old days, when there was a lot of activity and fellowship, and think about some of the possible reasons why that has stopped. Have we set the bar too high and the expectations too high? Could it be, and you'll forgive me for saying this, could it be we need to dumb it down a little bit so that some of the weaker in our party can come along with us? I see some furrowed brows because you're thinking. I have several thoughts in my mind, but I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to let you discover them. How can we lower the bar to not deter the weak and the slow? I'm talking about us as a church. And I'm not talking about theology. I'm talking about methodologies and practices. What are we doing in worship or teaching? Whether it's Sabbath school, whether it's small groups, what are we doing in our social activities that we might have set the bar so high that people have stopped trying, stopped coming, and we've lost the element of fellowship? We lost the element of participation because people feel that we've gone too far, too fast, and they can't keep up. Wouldn't it be funny if Jacob would have said to his brother, yeah, come on, and you'd have seen all the bodies laying in the wilderness as they took off? Because the two brothers were just so excited to meet each other and couldn't wait to get home. And then you see the cattle and the sheep who couldn't keep up that are laying dead. And then pretty soon you see the moms with the babies saying, all right, you guys go on. We can't keep up with you. And just imagine the carnage that Jacob would have left behind him if he'd have traveled at the speed of his brother. See, that's what this young man was trying to get me to do in the congregation. In his mind, he was so far ahead. He was running with the warriors. And he was going to fight the battle of God, and he was going to fight it in the church. And he wanted me to take the church at the speed he was going. And when I said no, I became a non-entity to him. I was no longer qualified to be a pastor or a leader. And that's how he treated me. How can we speak softly and act gently with all of those around us? It starts with each of us doing a little inventory of ourselves. The next inventory has to be, what are we doing as practices as a congregation that have precluded some from not participating? We'll continue this conversation in the future, because there's a lot of people that we're missing. I went through the list this week of 175 non-active members. And I went through the list. And do you remember a couple of weeks ago I put up a list of names that you gave me to pray for? Remember that, those of you who were here? I put it up on the screen, and I had 40 names that I put up there that you gave me. I asked you to fill out cards and tell me who's not here. Now, the interesting thing of that, what should I have seen if I compared that list of names with the 175? What do you think I should have seen? No. Only 20 people on that list up there were on the list of the non-actives. Less than 23%. Which means what? For those of you who are into statistics and looking at numbers and data, what should that tell me? It tells me that they've been gone so long, we've forgotten them. They don't even show up on a prayer list because they haven't been here in so long that you couldn't even remember their names to write it on cards. What are we going to do as a church to softly and gently engage these people and draw them back into fellowship? What are we going to do as a church to demonstrate to them the love of Christ? Let's sing our closing song.